And while they take orders from the same higher up, it all comes from God through the burning bush, through Jeff Teeper, that kind of deal. But but there's like a telephone game going on, and by the time it reaches the people that are actually coding this stuff, it sounds just a little different. So that's why things aren't exactly the same between lists and libraries.
Here we go, everybody. It is October 2nd. Welcome to Ask Some Praxis. All but our wonderful teammate Carrie is here today. We all have something to contribute. I'm letting Todd have the first slide. I know you were all impressed. All right, what are we going to go on about? Let's say it that way. What are you going to go on and on about
Todd,
today?
what are you going on about today?
Challenges with SharePoint lists and library experiences, and going on about it is certainly something we all feel. Although we're going to try to be temperate and just give good information and not bitch a lot, except for we're all going to bitch a lot. All right, so we're going to talk about what happened with SharePoint lists. So Todd's going to set the stage. Then we're going to talk about how the UX experience is different between lists and libraries and what all of those pieces and parts are. Mark is going to go over some list issues with regards to caching, and Patrick's going to hit miscellaneous list issues because there's a lot of just little bits and pieces that will bite you. And then I'm going to give an update on document templates in libraries. All right, so Todd, take it away.
So yes, those of you who are surprised that Julie's letting me talk, no one is more surprised than I am. So let's just
you should have seen his stunned face on Monday when I went, Todd, you talk about the first slide. He's like,
this Todd? What is there another? So anyway, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about why Microsoft has moved our cheese when it comes to lists and libraries. And so we thought it would be good to explain kind of why they moved it, and that might help it not smell quite so bad, though those of you that are in the chat room beforehand, we had a whole discussion about all that. But there's really kind of two things that has resulted in what we've got. Number one is that for a long time, and I don't know if it's still true, but for a long time, the lists experience and the libraries experience in SharePoint were owned by different teams. And there's a long legal explanation for that I won't bore anybody with. But for a long time, that was the case. I'm not sure if it still is or not. Okay, so Julie thinks it still is. So what that means is when there's any functionality that is the same between, both lists and libraries, like check in, check out, that kind of stuff, it's actually written twice by two different teams. And while they take orders from the same higher up, it all comes from God through the burning bush, through Jeff Teeper, that kind of deal. But there's like a telephone game going on, and by the time it reaches the people that are actually coding this stuff, it sounds just a little different. So that's why things aren't exactly the same between lists and libraries. And then on top of that, you got this whole Microsoft Lists app that is like another swing at how to do lists that may or may not be SharePointy. You never know. So that's part of what we're working with. Is we've got all these different people trying to fix the same problems. And the problem that they're trying to fix is, for a long time, there was this statement going around, especially by SharePoint's detractors, that SharePoint can't handle lists with more than 5,000 items. Now, back in the day, that was absolutely true. And back in the day, by touching a list with more than 5,000 items, you could actually take an entire SharePoint site down. Like that, it was that bad. It's not like that anymore. And so as data grew and as things like that, Microsoft had to find a way to make lists handle more than 5,000 items. And so some of the things that they have implemented are the problems that we're seeing that we're going to hear about in the next slide, especially slide 13. You're not going to believe what's on slide number 13.
And is that like Friday the 13th? I think it probably is.
Slide the 13th. And what they decided to focus on was the end user experience around, how fast the page refreshes, those kind of things. And so we had to give some things up, and that's why our cheese smells a little more rotten than it used to.
Focusing on user experience is an interesting way.
I was going to say, Todd, you sounded a little bit like a politician there.
Yeah.
Well, but
that almost wasn't cranky enough.
I question whether there was success.
Certain, so yeah, no question there. But I mean, like just how fast, like before pages that had, you go to a page with a list that had a lot of items, it would take forever for the page to load, or it would take forever for you to be able to click something on there. And they really focused on that initial experience.
That is true. I will give you that. Derek, talk to us about the user experience now.
Yes. So, I mean, Todd sort of mentioned the why, but lists and libraries have had a very long history of user experience disparity, right? And as he said before, it's really because at the very beginning, they were owned by two different teams and they were thought to be two completely different entities, when under the covers, they all sort of, the tech is pretty much the same. So when they rolled out Modern, way back when, it went to libraries first and then moved over to lists. I don't have a picture of like a 2010 list or something, like a pre-SPO list, but they were horrible. But now, you know, with the newer modern interface, we do have similarities here. There are a few differences, like you can navigate between document libraries. No, we're not going to talk about spinning up VMs. You know, you can navigate between libraries, but for some reason you can't navigate between lists. Not quite sure. You know, libraries have the pin to quick access, which lists don't. Lists have the new SharePoint list forms, which are another way to enter data, but libraries don't. But for the most part, you're going to see they have the similar look in the views. They have the similar look in the toolbars. They're pretty much in line with each other. If we go to the new lists, we got a bunch of cheese that got moved. And the most important or the most egregious, in my opinion, and I'm going to talk about this again in a little bit, is they moved the views. The views went from being in a dropdown and being alphabetical to being tabs across the top. And depending on how many views you have and how long the text is on the names of those views depends on what you get to see. The other thing that we had before was the filter option. That's now been expanded to allow us to filter, sort, and group. So that is, I mean, that's actually nice to have that functionality right there at the top of the screen. Actually, Julia, if you want to flip to the next one, I'll talk to the other things. Now, there's a couple of things. We lost the details pane. So after years of explaining to users with Modern that they could click the little eye at the top right.
Just when we had everyone trained.
Exactly. And we could use that for like editing of multiple items, which you could set the metadata for multiple items and all those things. They took it away. The other thing, and this we got in the new experience, we got the list icon. I don't know why lists need icons, at least not in the SharePoint setting. I have a feeling this is more built towards the lists app so that you can quickly differentiate the icon. But in a SharePoint setting, in a team setting, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The other thing that changed is, if you notice, it's not very apparent in this screenshot, but if you look at it in a live environment, the background color has changed in lists, and it's not theme aware. It doesn't align with your theme. It's just a random off-white, and honestly, it decreases the contrast ratio. I'm sure it meets the accessibility. I didn't check it. Stefan will check it later, but it does change the contrast ratio and just provides additional eye strain because it's really, really close. So there's a lot of cheese being moved. I'm going to talk specifically about my issues with the views in a couple of slides. But those are the big UX differences between lists and libraries and stuff.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric, for the very good summary that we just had. Mark, you're going to address the caching thing, which I think, to Todd's point, they made the effort to improve the user experience, and they did that with caching. And so I think a lot of what we're seeing that's super egregious that we've been sort of chatting about in the chat. So if you're watching this recording later, there's just tons of like chat conversations going on about this topic. But I think the bigger point here is that has created really serious usability issues with lists.
Yeah, I mean, I think that modern SharePoint introduced caching and partial page loading in way different ways than we used to see. So for example, if you're like people who are on this call and you want to click that little gear when a page is loading, you got to wait until the actual end of the page load. It's the first thing we want. It's the last thing most end users care about. So, you know, different people feel some of these things in different ways. With lists and libraries, and this has been the case since pretty much since moving to modern, but you know, you have to scroll down to load the next set of items or documents. So if you've got more than maybe 30 or so items or documents, you don't see them on a screen, but you don't care because they're down below the limit. What that does, though, is it creates several direct issues. One is when you want to delete a large number of items, or say you want to delete everything in a list, which as people who are building stuff, we want to do a lot. You just would want to sort of click that selector at the top that's supposed to select all and hit delete. But that only deletes the stuff that you've already loaded. So maybe maybe you've got 2,000 items in a list. When you select all and delete, it deletes 100. That's not what you asked it to do. So the only way you can actually delete everything in the list is if you're Derek and Julie, you write code, or if you're me, you scroll down to the bottom of the list, which is very, very painful. Or you delete the list and you start over because it's so ridiculous. So that's been around for quite a while, but that's part of that caching, part of that, it's actually not caching in that case, it's partial loading of the page to make it more efficient. But it has negative effects.
Mark, the other thing that I'm seeing when I delete items from a list, even if I like keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, if it's not all of the items and I delete them, the view itself says that there are no items in the list, when in reality, there are another 10,000 items in there or another 50. And you have to literally refresh the page to get the items that haven't been deleted yet. So it's giving this like false sense that there is something wrong when there actually isn't.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
part of the conversation going on the chat about this too is about, oh, well, you know, who uses the UI to delete all the list items and stuff. And it's a super good point and humorous too, as the chat is going on about, well, you could use PowerShell or PNB.js or the CLI or any of ShareGate or any of these tools. And that's wonderful. But the significant portion of people are end users who are just trying to do their job. And this is a serious blocker to them being able to do that.
Yeah,
and I think that's the bigger issue.
They could be using a list to manage requests that come in and they want to delete last year's requests because they've got too many items in the list. I mean, there are real scenarios where end users just want to delete stuff. So it ought to work.
Yeah, I agree.
And there's I think the list I just cannot talk. I think the second bullet is only with the new list, but I think it might also be with libraries because Julie told me about this too. If you have more than 5,000 items in a list, and depending on who you are, you think of lists and libraries as lists, but they're different things. You can't always delete that container because it's actually deleting all the items in the container first and then deleting the thing, which isn't really making much sense, but it can
that
block
absolutely
you
has
from
to be a
deleting
bug.
something.
Like
Yeah,
that
it could be a bug.
Yeah, I think it must be, but you still can't do it. And so I just went ahead and deleted the whole site. Not that that's always an option, but it was absolutely painful.
Now, there is something good about the new lists and deleting. I got that nice little message at the bottom. You see, I deleted something called test 1, and I got a little piece of toast that popped up right in the bottom of the screen, and it even has a link to open the recycle bin. So if I realize I did something wrong, I can fix it really easily. I noticed that today. I haven't seen it before. Doesn't mean it hasn't been there, but that's actually a really helpful thing. And if I deleted several items in a row, I get several different little pieces of toast that pop up. If you don't think of it as toast, they're little windows that just show up at the bottom. So that's actually sort of nice. The filtering thing is horrible, truly horrible. there's a video on the next slide, which we'll show for a few seconds. But basically, if you have values spread throughout a list and metadata values, and you want to say filter on the year, and there are lots and lots of years in the column.
Ooh, he's talking.
Am I talking? You can't. No one. We can't hear it.
Good.
So depending on how the list is sorted, how many things are in that first tranche of items that have loaded in the list, you may or may not see the values you want to filter by, which is crazy. So that played pretty fast. It's a pretty short little video, but basically, if you only have 2000s at the beginning and you filter, then that's all you see. But wait a minute, I want 2024. If I've sorted it so that it's sorted enough to bring the values, you see the different values in the year there, now I see all the values. That's just awful. And I didn't even realize I was having that problem. I kept rebuilding the list because I thought I'd done something stupid, but it's broken across the board. And I checked that again this morning just to make sure that's still a problem. So if you're filtering in a list and you don't see the values that you would expect to see, they're there, but you need to sort of think about how to sort the content so that you get the values to filter by. And then of course, you don't see all of the things that you've filtered for because of the caching and lazy loading. Not pleasant,
which unfortunately
and it can easily feel like a mistake. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I was going to say, which unfortunately, from my user experience, has raised questions with some of our clients, because obviously they're trying to be efficient in what they're trying to find, and this is not. It's had the opposite effect of being efficient, because now they can run a report and it may not pull all the information that they're looking for.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the day I realized it was a real thing was when somebody pinged me and said, our list is broken. Can you fix it? Well, it's not broken. It's got everything in it. It's just that we can't filter the way we used to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Patrick, since you're here and chatting, let's talk about some of the more just other miscellaneous issues we have with lists, starting here with fields.
Yeah, there's only a couple here. Our assumption is that you all may have run across some of these, and we'd love to see them in the chat as well. One of them is that you can't add some of the fields using modern UI. Case in point, content types. So when, for instance, you go to add a column, content type is not one of the ones that you can select to add anymore. You have to go in to edit the view and go into the classic mode in order to add the content type. Kind of frustrating. You would expect all your columns to appear and be able to be selected there. Another instance that we've run into is some classic settings have no impact, but are still there. Two that Derek and I were looking at this morning were selective style and the view count. So if you want to set the view count of the number of items, that doesn't work anymore. We tried setting it to 10, 0, 15, and it actually didn't do anything. One of the issues that I noticed a discussion of in the chat about was view names. Yes, some people may prefer the tabs for the different views. Works great if you have short view names, but if they're too long, they get cut off, so you can't actually see the whole title. And of course, with the size of your screen, you can very easily come to, say, 5 items that is then ... You get your little ellipsis and you have to pull down to find the other ones. And the other one that we run into is, I don't know if you've noticed, the frozen first column. And we have not found a way to turn this off. So what I mean by that is the first column, whether it's title or anything else, it just stays there. So it's kind of reminiscent of setting or locking a column in Excel, which my guess is what they were going with here. It can be a little confusing if you're trying to keep things. I can see it being a benefit in some ways, but it is just one of those changes that appeared out of nowhere.
I for sure think there's a benefit to it when you want
Yeah.
it, but you should be able to turn it on and off, and that's the thing that's egregious about it, from my perspective.
Exactly.
Derek, back over to
All
you.
right. So now onto my rant about the damn tabs. So, all right. The dropdown was lovely. I loved it because the dropdowns were alphabetical and they provided order and guidance there. They're now in their tabs. The good news, the tabs are alphabetical, which is wonderful. But if you have too many tabs to fit the screen real estate, you get an ellipsis, like you can see in the screen, that is kind of, sort of, but not really alphabetized. And what gets even worse, as you can see in the screenshot, if you select one of the items from the dropdown, it replaces the last view that's available in the tabs and then takes that view's name and slots it in wherever the old one was in the list. So you're taking a list that was ordered and was logical, and now it's completely irrelevant and not alphabetical or not in any sense of order that the user would actually be able to understand what's supposed to be there.
Lovely.
So that's bad.
Tell us how you really feel, Derek.
So is anyone on the call looking at it as, I mean, I think part of why we feel some of these things are bad is because they are different than what we've been using for the last, 20 years. That one feels like it's actually incredibly confusing. Does anyone think this is a good thing?
I think somebody on the chat was saying that she has.
Yeah,
Tara, right, was saying some users like it.
I would say that I have heard users are not unhappy with the tabs. They find seeing the tabs easier. They're not losing them. I cannot defend what is going on with this GIF very well either. So they are not minding having the way to change views more obvious, but it also is people who they're generally going in to put something into the list, get a quick look, go out of it. They are absolutely not doing anything heavy lifting with it.
Right.
Yeah.
And
there's
probably a good point to what Tara's saying, though.
Yeah, I wanted to give her a chance to say something positive about it if there was one.
I will say, I think one of the challenges, though, is I have a client that's using this for year-over-year data. So they've got like a view called Scorecard 2022, Scorecard 2023, and in the tabs, you never get to the year. They're alphabetical because Scorecard 2022 comes before 23, but you can't actually ever get to the full name because you can't expand the width. So it's just challenging.
So you're going to have, so that's an instance of needing to front load your data, which
absolutely.
I remember Emily used to talk about a lot when she was with us. Mike.
And there is no mouse over.
I have an idea for a positive for this is if they're trying to emulate like a recently used or most recently used, then I could see where that would become useful if people are only using like say 3 views out of a list that has 10 or so.
Yeah.
Or 15.
No, that's I totally hear you.
But I do agree that it is badly implemented, but I think with a few tweaks it could be made much better.
Agreed. Totally agree. All right, I promised slide 13 document template library updates. If you're a regular Ask and Praxis attendee, you will know I had a huge rant about document templates in libraries a few months ago at this point. I think the issue started for me in 2023, but the big rant I had and the deep dive I did was back in April. Since then, some things have been fixed. Okay, so what I am doing now to manage this is if you have a content type hub and you want to have content types with specific document templates, associated with the content types, and then use those content types in your document libraries and have that template come with, you need to centrally manage your document templates, obviously. And so the out-of-the-box way to do, well, in pre-SharePoint Online or Classic, you used to easily be able to create a document library, let's say in the root of your tenant, in the root, the home, the root site collection, and you could put all your templates in there, and then you could use a server relative URL to point to each of the document templates. And when the content type was then used, it would reference the server relative URL for the template, and all would be well in the world. Well, that broke for about 2 years, maybe 2.5 years. I am happy to report it is working again. However, I found that the best way to do it is to create that document library in the content type hub. I don't love it because you can't then make that document library your org assets library. So, that maybe needs a little bit more diving into, but I could not get that to work. I could not make that document library my org assets library. I don't have a reason why, so maybe there's a way around it. But at any rate, I was able to create a document library in the content type hub and then use the relative URL in the content types. And when you publish then those content types, so basically here I have a content type, and then I put the relative URL. You can see it's /site/content type hub, the name of my document library, and then the name of the template. And then when you publish the content type, it is available to be added into your template, or your document sites document library, and then it shows up in the new. And so this is wonderful, and it's so great. And the change that really I think there was some UI issues, but the other change that sort of happened is we got a new endpoint from a Microsoft Graph perspective. We got one called Add Copy from Content Type Hub. And if we had our third-party tools that were provisioning for us, because we don't sadly have provisioning from Microsoft in the way that we want to, and they weren't using this endpoint, the content types weren't being synced properly, and thereby the templates were not coming with. In addition to that, there was a UI bug. The UI bug got fixed. Some of our third-party provisioners are now using this API, and so we're having pretty darn good experiences, and it makes me pretty happy. One of the other issues that we have is if you have Microsoft Word templates, which are probably the more common, when you go in, say, new of that thing, it opens the template up in Word Online. And so by default, your document is associated with the library where you said new from. So you said new proposal, a new tab opens up with the proposal template in Word Online. You start working on it, you save it, you're in that document library, all is well in the world. That's awesome. What happens with the other ones, Excel, PowerPoint, particularly, is that if you say new, pricing sheet and it's Excel template, it opens up an Excel's client-side app instead of in Excel Online. And so originally, and I again had this problem, and this was a bug, I did mention something through somebody else I know at Microsoft to ask the Office team if they could look into this. And they must have, because what I noticed just recently is that when you go to save your Excel document that you created by saying new one of those, one of the content types that has an Excel template with it, you get this. And so you can see some of the most recently accessed locations, shared document libraries or whatever. But if you click the browse button, then it gives you, by default, you're in that document library. That is new. This was not happening before. And so now you can just give it a name and it'll save it right in that document library. Yay! And so for the end users, that actually, works pretty well and is not horrible. So I'm really, really, really happy about that. All right. We have a couple references. Mark had one of the ones on the earlier slides. I don't know if it got here, but some references for you. And then finally, to wrap it up, October 16th, we're going to have a special Ask Some Praxis Anything edition. We're calling it the Offsite edition because the whole team will be at Collab Days New England, other than Patrick, sadly. I wish Patrick could be there. So we will be doing a short little offsite. And so most of us will be in a conference room in Burlington, Mass. So we're going to do a special Ask and Praxis Anything with Patrick in from remote and Todd in from remote as well, although he'll be there on Thursday. So he will be with us shortly after. So that is what's happening next time on Ask and Praxis. So if you have questions, please submit those in because we'd love to address very specific questions that you as our attendees have. And then other than that, you can see us at TechCon Dallas. I'm going there November 11th through 15th, and ESPC in Stockholm, Sweden. Mark, Derek, and Patrick will be there. And if you haven't registered for Collab Days New England and you are in the New England area, please do so and join us live at that event. All right, that's all I have for today, and it was great seeing you all, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask Some Praxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.